The day the bank took the house, the fire was still burning. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the men. Not the papers. Not even the way they spoke to me like I was already gone. It was the fire. Still alive in the hearth. Still warm. Still mine. For a few more minutes. "Ma'am," one of the men said, clearing his throat as if that made what he was doing easier. "You'll need to gather your things. My name is Eliza Warren. I was 28 years old when I lost everything that had ever been mine. The house had belonged to my husband before it ever belonged to me. And when he died, it stopped belonging to either of us. Debts, that's what they called it. Numbers written on paper that somehow mattered more than the life we had built inside those walls. You've had notice," the second man added. I nodded. I know. I had known for weeks. But knowing doesn't make it easier when it finally happens. I walked through the house slowly, touching things as I passed them. The table, the chair by the window, the edge of the bed. Each one felt like it was already slipping away. I didn't take much. I couldn't. A small bundle of clothes. A kettle. A knife. And the one thing I refused to leave behind. A small iron pan that had cooked every meal we had ever shared. When I stepped outside, the cold hit me immediately. The kind of cold that settles in early winter. Sharp. Warning. Final. Behind me, the door closed. Not by my hand. And that was it. No shouting. No tears. Just silence. The kind that comes when something ends completely. Most people in my position would have gone to town. Found work. Taken a room somewhere. But I didn't. Because I had already learned something the hard way. If something isn't yours, it can be taken. So I didn't go looking for another place that belonged to someone else. I went looking for somewhere no one wanted. The ravine sat just beyond the far edge of the valley. Most people avoided it. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was useless. Too steep. Too narrow. Too shaded to grow anything. The creek that ran through it froze early in the season and didn't thaw until late spring. There was no reason to go there, which made it perfect. I reached it by dusk. The light was already fading, the sky turning that deep gray that comes before a long, cold night. The ravine dropped sharply, the walls rising on either side like something carved out of the earth by force. At the bottom, the creek moved slowly. Not frozen yet, but close. I climbed down carefully, testing each step. Loose rocks shifted under my boots. Cold air settled heavier the deeper I went. But something else changed too. The wind disappeared. Completely. By the time I reached the bottom, the silence was absolute. No gusts. No howl. Just the quiet sound of water moving over stone. I stood there for a moment, looking around. The walls were steep enough to block most of the sky. Trees grew along the edges, their branches reaching down but not quite touching the ground. It was colder here, but also still. And stillness meant something. Stillness meant control. I followed the creek a short distance until I found what I was looking for. A bend in the ravine, where the rock curved inward slightly, creating a natural pocket. Not a cave, but enough. Enough to work with. I set my things down and looked at it. This wasn't a home. Not yet. But it could be. And that was enough. The first night was brutal. Cold settled into everything. The ground. The air. My bones. I built a small fire, but it struggled. The dampness of the ravine made it harder to keep alive. And without walls, the heat disappeared too quickly. I barely slept. By morning, I understood something clearly. If I was going to survive here, I couldn't build a cabin the way we had in the valley. It wouldn't last. Not like this. Not in this cold. Not in this damp. I needed something different. Something that worked with the ravine, not against it. I started with stone. There was plenty of it. Loose rocks scattered along the creek. Larger pieces embedded in the walls. Heavy, difficult to move, but solid, reliable. I began stacking them slowly, creating a back wall against the natural curve of the ravine. Low at first, then higher, fitting each piece carefully, locking them together so they wouldn't shift. It took days just to build that first wall. My hands bled. My back ached. But I didn't stop, because every inch mattered. Every layer made the space more real, more protected, more mine. Once the back wall was solid, I worked on the sides, extending them outward. Not wide, just enough to create a small enclosed space. The front remained open, for now, because I didn't have enough material to close it yet. And even if I did, I wasn't sure I should. Not completely. Air needed to move. Fire needed to breathe. Everything was a balance. Too closed, and I'd suffocate. Too open, and I'd freeze. By the end of the first week, I had something. Not a house, but a structure. A space defined by stone instead of wood. Stronger. Heavier. Less exposed. I built the roof last. Using a combination of branches, smaller stones, and packed earth. Layered carefully to hold weight. To keep out snow. To trap heat. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The difference came immediately. The first night inside it. The fire held. Not perfectly, but better. The stone absorbed the heat. Held it. Released it slowly. The air didn't move the same way. Didn't steal warmth as quickly. For the first time since I arrived, I wasn't completely at the mercy of the cold. But the real change came later. When the first storm hit. It rolled into the valley without warning. Heavy snow. Strong wind. The kind that rattles everything loose and reminds you how fragile things really are. From inside the ravine, I barely felt it. The wind passed overhead. The walls blocked most of it. The snow fell, but it settled differently. Not drifting the same way it did in open land. Not piling against exposed walls. It just rested. I stepped outside briefly during the storm. Looked up. The sky was barely visible. The ravine held everything in place. And that was when I understood. This place was stronger than anything I could have built above ground. Not because of what I added, but because of what it already was. The walls weren't mine. The protection wasn't mine. I had just learned how to use it. Days turned into weeks, then into months. I improved the structure, closed the front partially with a low stone barrier, left a narrow entrance. Hidden, easy to miss unless you knew exactly where to look. I moved the fire pit deeper inside. Built a small chimney using stacked stone that guided smoke upward along the ravine wall instead of straight into the sky. From above, it disappeared, blended with everything else. No clear signal, no obvious sign. That part mattered more than I expected, because people did pass by. Occasionally, hunters, travelers cutting through the valley edge. They walked along the top of the ravine, close enough that I could hear them sometimes. But they never looked down, and even if they did, there was nothing to see. No cabin, no roof, no life, just rock, snow, and shadow. Weeks passed. Then the first deep freeze came. The creek began to ice over. The air grew sharper, colder, the kind of cold that kills slow and quiet. And that was when the difference truly showed. Because while the valley struggled, while fires burned constantly just to keep people alive, I was sitting inside a place the winter couldn't fully reach. The stone held the heat. The ravine blocked the wind. The structure I built didn't fight the cold. It ignored it. And more importantly, no one knew I was there. Not the bank. Not the town. Not anyone. As far as they were concerned. Eliza Warren had disappeared. Gone. Lost somewhere between the valley and the mountains. And I let them believe it. Because the moment they found me, this wouldn't be mine anymore. But winter wasn't finished yet. Not even close. And before it ended, something would happen. Something that would force people to look where they had never looked before. Down. Into the ravine. Into the place they had always ignored. And when they did, they wouldn't just find me. They would find something they needed. Something they didn't have. And something they would never have discovered if I hadn't lost everything first. The first sign wasn't the storm. It was the silence before it. The valley had a way of going quiet when something big was coming. Not peaceful quiet, heavy quiet. The kind that made even the creek seem hesitant as it moved over stone. I felt it 2 days before the snow began. The air shifted. Colder. Sharper. Different. I stood at the edge of the ravine and looked up toward the valley. Smoke still rose from chimneys, thin and steady, but something about it looked strained. Like it wouldn't last. I went back down and prepared. More wood inside. Stone tightened along the entrance. The chimney checked and cleared. Because if there was one thing I had learned, it was that the ravine protected me. But only if I respected it. The storm hit at night. Not with warning. Not with build. Just force. Wind tore across the valley above, roaring loud enough that I could hear it even down in the ravine. Snow followed fast. Heavy. Relentless. But inside, it was different. The wind passed overhead. The walls held. The stone absorbed the heat and gave it back slowly. I sat near the fire, watching the flame move steady and calm while everything outside was chaos. That was when I knew. This place wasn't just shelter. It was separation. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 long, violent days that buried the valley in snow deeper than anyone had seen in years. When it finally stopped, the silence returned. But this time, it was worse. I climbed out of the ravine slowly. The snow had changed everything. Paths were gone. Fences buried. Roofs barely visible beneath the weight. And the smoke was thinner. Some of it gone entirely. I stood there for a long moment. Then I saw them. At first, just movement. Small shapes against the white. Then clearer. People. Coming toward the ravine. Not many. For at first. Then more behind them. Moving slowly. Struggling. I felt that same tightening in my chest. Because I understood immediately. They weren't passing through. They were looking. And that meant one thing. They had run out. They reached the edge of the ravine and stopped. Looking down. Confused. Uncertain. There's nothing here, one of them said. There has to be, another replied. I saw the smoke come from this direction. My eyes shifted instinctively toward the chimney. Hidden. Blended. But not invisible. Not completely. Not in a storm like that. I stepped forward. Not fully into view. Just enough. A shadow against the stone. One of them saw me first. His eyes widened. Down there, he said. The others turned. And for a moment, they just stared. Because from where they stood, there was still nothing obvious. No cabin. No structure. Just rock. Until I moved. And then it changed. Climb down carefully, I called. My voice carried differently in the ravine. Lower. Contained. They hesitated. Then followed. Step by step. Slipping slightly on the snow-covered stone. Until they reached the bottom. And saw it. Not all at once. Because it wasn't built to be seen all at once. It revealed itself slowly. The walls. The entrance. The shape of something hidden in plain sight. One of the men stopped completely. How, he whispered. I didn't answer. Because there was no simple explanation. Another stepped closer. You've been here. Yes. Through the storm? Yes. They looked at each other. Then back at the valley above. Then at me again. And I saw it. The realization. The understanding that something had been here all along. Something they had never noticed. We need help, the first man said. His voice wasn't proud. Wasn't demanding. It was tired. Honest. I nodded. I know. I stepped aside. Come in. They didn't hesitate. Because the cold doesn't leave room for doubt. They entered one by one. And each of them reacted the same way. Silence. Relief. Disbelief. Because inside, it was warm. Not like the valley. Not like the houses they had left behind. Steady. Protected. Safe. More people came over the next 2 days. Small groups. Following the same trail. Drawn by the same thin line of smoke they hadn't noticed before. And each time, the same reaction. The same quiet shock. The same question in their eyes. How did this exist, without anyone knowing? We made space. Shifted things. Sure what I had. Because the ravine held more than it seemed. And the structure was stronger than it looked. By the end of the week, no one was standing in the valley anymore. They were all here. Or what was left of them. Alive. Because of a place they had ignored for years. Turner was among the last to arrive. He stood at the edge of the ravine for a long moment before coming down. When he reached the bottom, he looked around slowly. You were right here, he said. Yes. All this time. Yes. He shook his head. We walked past this place hundreds of times. I know. He looked at the walls. The stone. The way it blended into everything around it. We didn't see it. No, I said. You weren't looking for it. Silence settled between us. Then he glanced back toward the valley. Bank took your home, he said. Yes. And you built something better. I shook my head slightly. I built something they couldn't take. He nodded slowly. And that was the difference. The valley had been built on things that could be owned. Bought. Taken. But this belonged to no one. And because of that, it had survived. The snow began to melt weeks later. Slowly. Carefully. Revealing what remained of the valley. But things weren't the same anymore. They couldn't be. Because now people knew. They knew where to look.